Well, that's kind of a neat story, but it's kind of a long one. I was in Washington. I had a different company at that point in Washington, D.C. And I was doing electronic imaging. And it was going great, but it was also going away. I knew when you could start walking into a CVS or a Rite Aid or something, and in one section you would find scanners and CD-ROMs for sale. I knew it was going away because then everybody could do what I was doing. So I was looking for something else to do. And I wasn't quite sure what. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I've always wanted to be a writer. So I thought, well, maybe I can switch over and start writing books. So we tried something first. I got my hands on a copy, way out of copyright, from the late 1800s, of Frank Leslie's illustrated history of the Civil War. And it had never been reprinted. So I thought, great. So I got the thing, and I scanned the whole thing in, and rather than reprinting it, I put it out on a CD-ROM. And it was Leslie's history of the Civil War and the CD-ROM. So I'm going to start going faster now. And then what happened was they did it. I put it out. I went to the Smithsonian, who happened to be a client of mine at the time, and said, "Can you use this?" And I was thinking, Smithsonian Books. They'd put it out that way. And they said, "Well, we can't use a CD-ROM. We don't do that." I said, "All right." However, they had just signed an agreement with HarperCollins to put out books. So she happened to put me in touch with the new editor at HarperCollins who was going to be doing this. So I went, and she said, I like this a lot. I said, great. She said, what else have you got? And I didn't have anything. So what I did was I said, well, give me a day, rather than just throwing stuff, give me a day to come back to you. She said, okay. So after that meeting, my wife and I went to a bar, and we sat there and drank and came up with titles of books that we could do. And then we went back to the next meeting, and she said, well, I like this one. I like that, not so much, but I like this, I like this. And she took 5 of the titles. And I mean, I was flabbergasted. Guys work forever to get in to a publisher. And here in a day and a half, I've got 5 titles. So I get a call, and they tell me, all right, you got to come up to Manhattan now, sign contracts and stuff. Fine. So we were driving up, and we stopped here, because we always stopped here at the York Emporium. And we came in here. Now, whenever we would go to a bookstore, my wife, my poor, long-suffering bride, knows me very well. And whenever we go to a bookstore, she'd say, now look, you can only spend $10. You can only spend $15. There was always a very tight budget of what I could do. And we had just gotten a big payment from the Smithsonian. So we pulled into the parking lot. She didn't say anything. So I said, now look, you can only spend $15,000 in here. You know, no more than that. And maybe he'll take that for the whole store. So we get in here, we buy our pile of books, and Gary, who was the owner at the time, we brought him up here, the books up to the counter, and we told him the story. And he looks at me and he said, well, if you're interested, let's talk. Now, this was Labor Day weekend. I took over the store on January 1, like 3-4 months later. It probably wasn't the most fiscally prudent thing I've ever done, but I did it. So I bought the store. That was 20 years ago. And we took over on, well, not quite 20, but just about 20 years ago. We took over on January 1 of that year. And so that's the story of how I came to own the York Emporium.
Now you have to forgive me, because I'm originally from Maryland. I grew up an hour away from the area. But when you procured the space from Gary, was the Emporium always, the 10,000 square feet that we're sitting in today, or was that something that, as you owned it, you added to it?
No, actually, just the opposite. It was 20,000 square feet when I took it over. Um, but then, through a series of moves, um, two or three owners of the building went by, and finally Royal Square owned it. And I was working with them for a year or two, and that was fine. Well, then what happened was, as I say, they bought the entire building here and the apartments next door. That's a very storied building next door. You probably don't know a lot of it, but there's a lot of stuff that has happened in there. Anyway, they bought this, and they said, look, we're going to have to increase the rent because we're not making enough, which is understandable. They weren't making anything off me. But they said they were going to take the 5,000 square feet, and my rent was going to go up to $5,000 a month. That's an awful lot of $3 paperbacks, and I just couldn't do it. So they said, fine. What we'll do is we'll cut it in half, and we'll make it 10,000 square feet, and then we'll cut down the rent too. So that was about 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
So.
But even then, I mean, it's such an impressive amount of space. You see all the collections around you. Do you have an estimation of how many books are in the Emporium now? Or was it one of those things you had an estimate and then they just kept growing and growing and growing and you eventually lost track?
Well, I wouldn't say I lost track, but there's about 500,000 in here right now. Now, I don't necessarily own them all because there are other dealers in here who rent space for me and they bring in their own books. But there's about 500,000 books in here.
And you have, would you say you have a little bit of everything? Because we're near the science fiction area right now. If we look over there, I see, what looks to be a doughboy. So I'm sure you have a lot of war books.
Yes,
history.
We've got a big history section there. And this is science fiction. But we have two science fiction areas. So we got one here, we got another one in the back of the store. We have the military history back in this corner. But then we've got an awful lot of military history over here. So this is really a supermarket, and we have a little bit of everything. We really do.
And because that was the other thing I noticed is there's a lot of also physical memorabilia here. I see posters, that Blue Boy canister right there.
Yeah.
Has that always been a part of the Emporium, or is that something when you took over that you wanted to include to give it more of a distinct identity to other bookstores?
I wanted to do a lot more of it. He had some, but I wanted to do a lot more of it. When I first took over, what we did is there was a huge display case, and it was big. It was like 12 foot on the side or something like that in the middle of the store, and it was just, he had nothing in it essentially. So what I did is I converted it, and we started doing an awful lot of militaria is called. So we would have helmets and bullets and bayonets and all that kind of stuff in there. And from there, it just kind of snowballed, and we started getting more and more. At one time, somebody came in and brought me a lava lamp. So I said, well, I didn't particularly care for lava lamps, but it was free, so. And then as we went on, people were saying, oh, you like lava lamps. And they started bringing me lava lamps. And at one time, we had something like 30 of them going in here. So everything just kind of snowballs, just kind of grows, which is kind of neat.
And when we were talking when we were talking before the camera started rolling, we were talking about how you've had events here where you've interviewed authors, writers, people like that. Where did that idea come from? Not only having a bookstore where people, the community can interact, but many people can now have the opportunity to interact with some of those authors or those like-minded writers in the same venue?
Well, where it came from initially was when we first started the store, nobody knew who we were, where we were. And I needed to do something to change that. So what I wanted to do was get stories in the newspaper and on television and such. But I didn't really have an awful lot to tout at that point. And the inventory then was not nearly as good as it is now. A lot of books without dust jackets and that kind of stuff. Some of the paperbacks were in kind of tough shape. So I needed to do something to spark some interest. So I thought, well, what can I do here to spark the interest, not only among consumers, but again, among the media? So I said, well, okay, we'll do a genre days. So we had a science fiction Saturday. We had a horrible Saturday. We had a Civil War Saturday. And we did other things like a Celtic autumnal, and which is something I don't know exists. I made it up. But we would just do all kinds of Celtic stuff. We do it around Halloween. But when we would have these things, there would be a day-long of programming. We would show a movie, science fiction movie. We would have various authors come in and talk about what they did. And then we'd have local celebrities and stuff. For example, I don't know if your viewers are going to remember this, but one of the Star Trek movies, there was a section showing Sulu sitting in a captain's chair. He was now Captain Sulu, and he was drinking coffee. And he was drinking coffee out of a special mug. And the mug was a Falstaff mug. So I tracked down the designer of all the Falstaff stuff for Star Trek. He came in with some samples of what he had done and some stories about what he had done. So we were getting all that kind of stuff. And then we had authors of the science fiction, of the Star Trek books, and other science fiction authors come in. And we would have signings, and they would sign the books and that sort of thing. We did that for pretty much all the genres. On a Civil War day, which was in the middle of summer, we actually had both Confederate and Union reenactors here. So we had a skirmish out in the parking lot, you know, and the Confederates were down there and Unions with this. They would approach each other and they would be firing blanks, of course, but they'd be firing at each other. It was kind of fun. So we do all that stuff. And as I say, whoops, I'm losing my mic.
Sorry, here, I'll take it back underneath your collar. There we go. That was
Sorry, a little bit
No,
too
no, you're
animated
fine.
there. But we were doing all that stuff, and everybody was having fun, and we were selling, Civil War books and that kind of thing. But what was important to me is, number one, people would begin to know about us, and number two, I would be in here on a Saturday or a Sunday, and I wouldn't have to be alone. I got really tired of being in here alone on the weekend. So do this other kind of stuff to kind of drag people in, and it's worked.
And I would think, when it comes to bookstores, there's a certain level of interactivity that's usually reserved when a customer brings the book up to the front counter to purchase it or check it out. But what you have done through your 20 years owning the Emporium is that you have, multiplied that interactivity, having conversations, reenactments, things like that. And, this goes back to something I learned through communication studies and not journalism, is just how important that interpersonal interaction is with people, especially for a business like this. Is
Yeah.
that something that you considered? I know you said the intention was always to get people in the shop and for people to know what or who is the York Emporium, but, have you does that come across your mind, just that you've created those interpersonal experiences with people that wanted them to come back and, you know, not only know your name, but maybe another customer that walked in and now, oh, that's a familiar face. I saw them at this event weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that was done on purpose. Actually, my background is not in journalism. My background, way back when, 1,000 years ago, was in advertising and promotion. And the most powerful form of advertising still is word of mouth. You know, when, you know, Mary and Joni are talking over the back fence and they say, hey, have you been down to the York Emporium? So that's the strongest when somebody you know recommends something. The problem with that is that's the longest it takes to take hold. So the first thing that we had to overcome was no one had heard of us. No one had heard of York Emporium. So, you know, we did all these honor days. We did all the stuff in the newspapers and all that sort of thing. And I knew that was starting to work when the newspaper started calling me and looking for stories. I thought, yes, hot damn, it means something. But it has taken a good long while for the word of mouth to kick in. But I think it has now. And that you can't really push too hard. That has to be something organic. And I think we finally got that going here in New York too.
That's amazing. And you know, I don't want to say I completely identify with this story because it's your experience. But when I was reading an article online, someone that interviewed you, it connected with me in the sense that I'm not from this area either, that I'm trying to make a name for myself as a reporter, that I want people to trust me, you know, when they see me either on television or on the street. You know, for the 20 plus years that you've been in the area, working at owning the York Emporium, you know, do you think you've accomplished that goal of blending in or fitting into the greater York County community? Do you feel welcome? Do you think people have accepted you as a resident?
I think so. I think so. I do feel very much like I have fit in because of the programs we used to do on, I can't remember the call letters for the community access and Comcast access. My wife would get so upset because we couldn't go out to dinner anywhere because people were always recognizing me and waving at me and coming over and talking to me and all that. I never had anyone ask for my autograph, but just I was like a local celebrity. And she used to complain about that because we could never just go somewhere and have dinner or something. And I would get recognized on the street or wherever all the time. And so, yes, I think York Emporium has done an awful lot for that. As a matter of fact, we moved to town about 20 years ago. And when we were thinking about retirement, we actually went out and bought a house. So we're now living and residents in York. You know, we bought a house up by Leader Heights, so we are actually here now. I guess I am a Yorker.
Very nice. No, as you know, I know we'll speak to Scott here in a few minutes, so I'm looking forward to hear his story too, how he came to find the York Emporium. When you made the decision that it was time to transfer the business to, as you had quoted in another online article, the next generation, what was that process like? Has Scott always been, you know, the man for the job, or did you go kind of through a list of applicants? And you know, I can't imagine a 20-year history was condensed down to maybe just one decision. I'm sure it was a multi-week, you know, process.
Oh, sure. Well, there were a number of people. I don't think Scott was among them who, after they came in here and bought stuff, said, hey, if you ever think about selling, this is me. So I was going through all those. This is not a short process. I have been thinking about this for a good long multi-years now, because I'm about to be 70, and it's getting a little old for me to be slinging around boxes of books and all that kind of stuff. But there were a number of guys I talked to, and it was all kind of wishful thinking, pie in the sky kind of thing for them. So one by one, they were crossed off the list. And then Scott came forward, and we made a deal. So it worked out. It wasn't so much that I was thinking forever about Scott, but I was thinking forever of someone just like Scott. I didn't know him then. And I mean, he's an experienced bookseller. He's established. He's got a family and kids and all that kind of stuff. So he's not some kind of fly-by-night operator. And he's a dealer in here now, as a matter of fact. He has been several years, so he knows the York Emporium. And the York Emporium, I have always tried to make it so it's not just a store that you go to, like a supermarket or whatever. I've always tried to make it the York Emporium experience, and that includes the books, of course. It includes the stuff that we've got. We've got stuff everywhere, the signs and the posters and the standees and all that kind of stuff. It's the music, and it's just a relaxed atmosphere. I'll go up to customers, I'll approach them when they're here, and I got a couple questions that I always ask. Are you having a good time? Are you guys behaving yourselves? That kind of stuff. Just to get around with them a little bit, to make them feel more at home.
And you just telling that story, it almost appears like a history is repeating itself in the same sense that Scott, again, I don't want to talk, about him until I talk to him, but Scott, like yourself 20 years ago, wasn't looking to get into a business like this, that it almost happened on accident, that it was just at the right opportunity,
right,
the right time, and that's how it happened.
Yeah. And like I say, I had Scott in mind for years. I did not know him, but it was a guy who loved books, who knew the business. There's a difference between loving books and running a bookstore. First thing is, when you're running a bookstore, you don't get to read anymore. I haven't had time to do that. Used to be, I would go through a book a week at least, in addition to working full time and having 3 kids and a mortgage and. I still would, read all the time. It's been 20 years and I've maybe read half a dozen books in 20 years. And I'm really looking forward to changing that now. So I wanted the guy to know what it was like to be involved in this business. And when a book comes in the door, how to judge it. Is it worthwhile? Is it not? Is it very worthwhile? That sort of thing. And Scott is exactly what I was looking for. Even before I knew him, he was the kind of guy, if I were to close my eyes and lean back in a chair, this is the kind of guy I'd visualize.
And so when does the title of owner, manager transfer over to Scott? Or has it already done that and you two are just in the process of transitioning, making sure he's comfortable and acclimated with the environment?
Well, yeah, we have a contract, and that's all signed off on and everything. So it has been Scott's store since the beginning of April. But part of the contract is that I'm going to come back one day a week. And I'm not sure exactly why, to help out or to price books or whatever. He's certainly more than capable of doing that. But it's in the contract, and, it's fine. Because I'm a newly retired guy and I don't want to get too bored right away. So I'm going to come back one day a week. But the store is his store now.
And I would say, really, as my final question, I know you had already kind of briefly touched on it when you're talking about customers. You want them to come in here and have the York Emporium experience.
Right.
You don't want them to think about it as, like you said, compared to a grocery store where they come in, get their items, and walk out. anybody watching at home who, maybe someone younger like myself, what would you say is the message of the Emporium? Is it to have that experience of coming in and finding something you didn't expect to find, or is it just that this is a place that a community can come together, where there's a little bit for everyone?
It's both. It's both. I want people to be able to come in and meet old friends and, new friends. I want people to come in and just take a look at the bookshelves and maybe go to a bookshelf that you wouldn't normally go to because there may be magic sitting there waiting for you. So I want it to be all of that kind of stuff, and it's hard for me to describe it. But if you've been here, then you know what the experience is like. This is not Barnes and Noble. This is not. We are a little bit more rumpled. We're a little bit more comfortable. We do different kinds of things like the genre days. Every year we have the Pennsylvania Cigar Box Guitar Festival here. So it's a little bit of everything. And stuff you wouldn't normally associate. A cigar box guitar, for Christ's sake, you wouldn't necessarily associate that with a bookstore. But again, this is not Barnes & Noble. And Barnes & Noble is fine. But this ain't
is
it.
the York Emporium.
This is the York Emporium.